This story happened not too long ago in 2022. I have a job in a big city and use a parking garage where I leave my car during work hours. One Friday, after a particularly busy day, I didn't leave the office until around 9 p.m. I collected my things and made my way to the parking garage linked to our building. My car was always parked on the 4th level. It had become my spot, part of my daily routine. That evening, the garage was shrouded in shadows, and there were hardly any cars left, maybe 5 at most. I approached my 2015 Buick Enclave, unlocked it, settled in, and started the engine to drive home. As I began my drive, a strange noise from the rear of the car caught my attention. At first, I decided to ignore it and just focus on driving. But then, the noise came again a few minutes later. This time I turned around to check. What I saw in the back seat was both shocking and unfamiliar. It took a moment, but then it became clear. A man was hiding right behind my back seats. In a panic, without thinking twice, I pulled over, jumped out of the car, and started running. I was still within the city limits, surrounded by buildings and people who gave me odd looks as I sprinted past them. Ignoring their stares, I whipped out my phone and dialed the police. The stranger in my car didn't come out. I turned just in time to see my Buick driving off into the night. My car was being stolen right in front of my eyes. In that moment, I questioned if leaving my car was the right decision. Though I had lost my car, at least I was safe. I had to call a friend to pick me up and drop me off at home. We reported the theft, and after about a week, the police found my car. That terrifying night is something I will never be able to forget. Ever since I stopped teaching, life has become incredibly dull. People often rave about how great it is to retire, but for me, it has been nothing but a drag. Each day is just like the one before, and I miss feeling useful. I taught science in high school for more than 20 years, which kept my mind sharp even as I got older. But now, I miss it more than I expected. Last summer, feeling restless, I looked for jobs nearby to keep myself busy. I found an ad for a bus driver at a local elementary school. Living in Cedarville, Ohio, there were plenty of schools around within a short drive from my home. Initially, I was unsure about the job because I wasn't sure I could handle the energy of young children, but after some thought, I decided to give it a try. The job had its downsides, and I quickly noticed that some of the kids were quite unruly. However, the area I worked in was very upscale, with kids from families that owned homes I could never afford, even after a lifetime of working. On a particularly ordinary day during my afternoon shift just before the winter holidays, I noticed the bus was lighter than usual. Fewer kids had boarded. I was on my way to the final stop of my route in a large, affluent neighborhood. From what I recall, around 8 or 9 children lived there. The community was generally quiet and seemed safe. When I pulled up to the stop at the end of the street to let off 3 kids, I saw a man standing by the sidewalk staring at the bus. He was next to a maroon Volkswagen parked by the curb. I figured he must be a parent waiting for his child, as it's common for parents to meet their kids at the bus stop. I have a strong memory for faces, and I didn't recognize him. 2 boys from the 2nd grade and a little girl from kindergarten stepped off the bus. I watched them cross the street towards the man. It was a chilly, snowy day, so the bus windows were shut, but I could see the man speaking to the young girl. I couldn't hear them, but it was clear from the girl's body language that she was uneasy. She started to step back from him. I sensed something was off. Then suddenly the man's voice grew louder, and the little girl broke into a run towards the bus. I opened the door and she hurried back into the bus, tears streaming down her face and her whole body trembling. I gently asked her if she knew who the man was, and she just nodded her head. Feeling puzzled, I stepped off the bus to talk to the man. He was slurring his words and seemed unstable on his feet. Even if the girl did know him, his clear drunkenness made me certain she wouldn't be safe going with him. Trusting my instincts, I drove off with the girl still crying in the back. I was confused and worried, but I planned to call my supervisor after dropping off the rest of the children. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw his car following us. I thought maybe he was just upset because I didn't let the girl go with him, but I felt I had done the right thing. I kept driving, but his car didn't stop following us. Not wanting to let any other children off with him still behind us, I asked the girl more about the man. She barely spoke, only whispering that he was a friend of her dad's. This information only added to my concern. I still had several kids on the bus and couldn't risk stopping with him tailing us. I decided to call the school and have them contact the girl's parents to confirm if they knew this friend of her dad. Shortly after I made the call, the school called me back. The parents were adamant. The man had no reason to be there, and they insisted that their daughter should not go with him. That was all I needed to hear to call the police. I relayed the situation to the dispatcher, who instructed me to keep driving around the neighborhood until I could meet up with a police cruiser. Within minutes, I saw 2 police cars coming our way, their lights flashing. They pulled the man's car over and arrested him. After that, I was able to drop off the rest of the kids safely. A couple of days later, while picking up students on the last day before the Christmas break, the girl's father handed me a Christmas card. I waited until I got home to open it, and inside, he had written a heartfelt thank you note. In the card, he explained that the man trying to take his daughter was a former employee he had recently fired after a serious disagreement at work. The man had been to their house before, as he was one of several co-workers invited over for dinner the previous summer. The father believed the man was plotting some sort of revenge. Realizing this sent chills down my spine. Thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't been cautious that day made me incredibly sick. I was just thankful that I stayed alert and acted when I did. If I had driven off sooner, things could have turned out much worse. I was alone in a secluded valley, camping without any cell phone service. It was getting late, and I was still on the trail when I met a friendly local guy as darkness fell. He pointed me to a hidden camping spot near the road and the river, well concealed by the surrounding trees. There, I lit a fire, enjoyed a beer, and listened to a comedy podcast from a friend, relaxing as the evening turned into night. Because it was already dark, I opted to sleep in the back of my truck under the cover, surrounded by my gear instead of setting up a tent outside. The next morning I started another fire, opened a beer, and began to prepare breakfast. That's when I noticed a man at the edge of my campsite. He approached, but never made eye contact. This man seemed homeless, with a long, unkempt beard and his clothing almost completely covered with numerous plastic grocery bags. I tried to make conversation, commenting on the beauty of the day, but he didn't respond. I offered him some breakfast, and again, no response. He just paced around the edge of my camp. I even held out a beer to him, but he simply turned away. He just stood there, his back to me, roaming aimlessly. I realized that this encounter might not end well. I kept my bear spray and a large knife within easy reach. Eventually, I confronted him. "Look, you either acknowledge me, sir, or you need to leave immediately." He continued to ignore me. With no other choice, I picked up the bear spray and stepped toward him. He slowly walked away. I quickly packed up my truck and left that area in a hurry. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if he had been watching me throughout the night. I felt a surge of relief for deciding to sleep in my truck rather than in a tent. I have to admit, nothing could have prepared me for the chilling events that unfolded the morning after a simple night out. The evening started like any other. My family and I were gearing up to attend a local pub for a charity event. Having just turned 18, I was excited to spend a relaxed evening with close friends and family. I was familiar with most of the attendees, which made me feel quite at ease. While at the pub, I walked over to pay for my drink, only to be told by the bartender that someone had already covered it. Curious, I glanced around to find out it was Mike, my cousin Lucy's boyfriend. Mike was significantly older, around 10 years my senior. I acknowledged his gesture with a quick wave and exchanged a few casual pleasantries like, "Hi, how's it going?" It's worth noting that I hardly knew Mike, as he was typically reserved and would often seclude himself in the bedroom whenever we visited Lucy. After expressing my thanks, I didn't think much of our brief exchange. The evening rolled on uneventfully, and soon I gathered my family to head home. At that time, I was still living with my mom. She had planned to spend the night at my grandmother's place, so the plan was for me to return home alone. Around 11:30 p.m., I stepped outside for a quick smoke before driving back. Just as I was about to walk to my car, I heard someone call out my name. Turning around, I saw Mike approaching. He inquired if I was headed home, which struck me as odd. I affirmed, mentioning that it was late and I was wrapping up the night. Without hesitation, he noted the make of my car and mentioned he'd see me around. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and feeling a bit uneasy, I briskly said goodnight and made my way to my car. The area was still bustling with people, so I wasn't overly worried, just a bit unsettled. As I settled into the driver's seat, my phone began to ring. It was my mom. She sounded frantic, pleading with me to spend the night at my grandmother's instead. Initially, I was annoyed. I just wanted the comfort of my own bed, but her persistence was unusual. I couldn't fathom her concern. Being home alone wasn't new to me, but she was adamant. I ended the call somewhat frustrated and began driving home. I didn't see the point in detouring to my grandma's when my own home was so close. I was weary and yearning for the familiar comfort of my own space. However, my phone buzzed again before I could get far. It was my sister this time, also urging me to go to Grandma's. Now, truly irritated by their insistence, I decided it would be simpler to just head to my grandmother's house rather than argue further. When I arrived, everyone was already asleep. That night, despite being really annoyed, I went straight to sleep at my grandma's. It was a quiet night, but the next morning I woke up to my family discussing their shared sense of unease, which was why they insisted I shouldn't be alone that night. After breakfast, my mom and I decided to go back home. The moment we pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. As I approached the front door, I noticed a police card stuck in it, urging us to contact them immediately. Entering the house, I spotted my mom's camera on the kitchen table. This was strange because I distinctly remembered it being in my room the previous evening. A chill ran through me as I headed to my bedroom, only to discover it completely turned upside down. Unlike the rest of the house, my room was the only target. My bed was a mess, as if someone had been lying there. My drawers were flung open and my clothes were scattered all over the floor. Another one of my mother's cameras was positioned on a table facing my bed. My heart started to race, realizing the seriousness of the situation. If I'd come home last night as I intended, I would have walked through the house in the dark and crawled straight into bed, oblivious to the chaos around me, something I had done countless times before. My mother immediately called the police to understand what had occurred. The details she learned turned my initial fear into horror. Our neighbors had encountered a break-in the same night. They found a man inside their home who claimed to be a friend of mine and entered mistakenly. After they chased him away, he was spotted on our large deck, which overlooks their property. They called the police again, and this time, officers came to our house around 2 a.m. Since no one was home, the police entered through an unlocked back door and searched the house, finding a man lurking in my dark bedroom. He couldn't explain why he was there or why he chose to hide in my room specifically. The police arrested him, and to everyone's shock, it turned out to be Mike, Lucy's boyfriend. He had been waiting in my bedroom, knowing I was supposed to return that night. I still get chills thinking about how my mom and sister seemed to know something was wrong. Whether by sheer coincidence or something else, their insistence saved me from potentially walking into a dangerous situation. Since that night, I've never doubted my mother's instincts. The experience taught us all the critical importance of listening to those gut feelings. Mike faced charges for breaking and entering, spent time in jail, and eventually left the country. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I lived on a small, quiet street that ended in a circle. At that time, I had some friends nearby, and one night we decided to watch some movies at the local cinema. It was me and my two friends, a boy I'll call Tom and a girl I'll call Lily. The cinema was just a 15-minute walk from where we lived, so it was easy for us to walk there together and come back home after the movie. It was already dark when the movie ended, and as we were walking back, Tom, Lily, and I talked about the movie. We dropped Tom off at his house first. Just as we were saying goodbye to him, a stray dog without a leash wandered over to us. Lily and I couldn't help but pet the dog. It was very friendly and seemed happy to see us. However, as we were playing with the dog, an older man approached us slowly. We thought he was probably the dog's owner. Lily and I said goodbye to Tom and started walking towards our homes. We lived next door to each other on this very quiet, dead-end street. Oddly enough, the man and the dog began to follow us. It was strange because he definitely did not live on our street, and neither Lily nor I knew him. Feeling uneasy, Lily and I quickened our pace and went straight to her porch. The man continued to follow us, his face breaking into a creepy smile that made me feel really uncomfortable. Something about him made me panic inside, and although I was supposed to go to my own house, I instinctively followed Lily into hers. As we reached her front door, the man was just a few steps behind us. Lily fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking as she tried to find the right one. We were both scared. After what felt like forever, we managed to get inside her house and locked the door. The man stood there for a moment, staring at us through the glass door with that eerie smile, then finally walked away. Lily and I watched from the window as he left. The dog, which had seemed so sweet, simply wandered off in another direction, which made us think it wasn't even his dog. Looking back, it seems less scary because nothing bad actually happened. But at that moment, the fear was real. The way he smiled, the cold look in his eyes. I will never forget that night. We kept wondering, what if he had tried something? Could he have taken us without a car? The thoughts alone were terrifying. This story happened to me around 3 years back. At that time, I was really hooked on using Snapchat, and I preferred it over any other way to chat or share moments. I had many friends on Snapchat, and honestly, a bunch of them were strangers. Some were friends of friends, or maybe they went to the same school as I did. One day, a girl named Emma shared on her Snapchat that she was selling her MacBook Pro for $1,000. This seemed like a great deal since I needed a new computer, so I messaged her to show my interest. I offered her $800, but we eventually agreed on $900. We decided to meet the following day at a garden center's parking lot close to the highway. It took me about 20 minutes to drive there. When I arrived, the place wasn't busy, just 5-10 cars scattered around. I sent Emma a message on Snapchat to let her know I was there. She asked what my car looked like. After I described my car, she said she'd be there soon. I looked around, but the parking lot was nearly empty except for some parked cars. My car was parked by some trees and a large dumpster at one edge of the lot. While I was waiting and checking my phone, I suddenly heard a loud thump at the back of my car. I spun around to see a man standing there. Then a noise from the front caught my attention, and when I looked, I saw another man right in front of my car. They began banging on my car from both ends. In a panic, I tried to start the engine. The men tried to trap me by holding onto both the front and the back of my car, making it hard for me to drive away without hitting them. I managed to maneuver slightly and pushed one of the men back just enough to create a gap to reverse through. They chased after my car, hitting it a few more times, but I hit the gas hard and managed to escape. I drove straight home. My car was a bit damaged, but nothing too serious. I never reported what happened. When I tried to contact Emma again, I discovered she had blocked me on Snapchat. When I was a student, I went to a pretty big university. I lived in a tiny apartment not too far from the school, about a mile away. I needed someone to share the place with because living alone was getting too expensive, but all my friends already had their own arrangements. So I decided to post an advertisement on Craigslist, looking for a roommate. That's when a man named Alex replied, saying he was interested in seeing the apartment. We arranged a meeting and he came over the next day. Alex seemed like a regular person at first glance. He told me he didn't go to my university, but he worked somewhere close. He was polite and seemed okay overall. However, something about him made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was exactly. After he had a look around the apartment, he left. I told him I would think about it and let him know. That same evening, I was just lounging on the sofa, casually switching between TV channels. I paused when I reached the news channel. They were reporting on a recent crime, a murder to be precise. The police had just arrested a suspect. My heart nearly stopped when they showed the suspect's photo. It was Alex, the guy who had just visited my apartment. I stared at the screen, shocked and scared. I realized just how close I had come to possibly making a very dangerous decision. Needless to say, I decided not to invite him to move in with me. Instead, I started to be more careful about who I would consider letting into my home. Many years back, when I was a teenager, my buddy Alex and I would often head out for night rides on our skateboards. We both were creatures of the night, enjoying the quiet and solitude of empty streets and paths. It was quite a sight, having the roads to ourselves. Even on the main roads, it was rare to come across any cars. You could see them from miles away, their headlights breaking the calm of the darkness. We were really into skateboarding back then, sometimes traveling miles and only getting home at sunrise. One night, we decided to venture further than our usual spots to explore one of our favorite hidden tracks. The path was narrow, paved, and ran between two stretches of a long lake. The path often flooded after rain, so we wanted to catch it before the weather turned. The trail was about 2 miles long and offered a soothing ride surrounded by beautiful views. After reaching the lake's end, we turned onto a path that led straight into a dense forest preserve. As we approached the first hill and looked down into the darkness, we saw something unusual. There was a faint, moving glow. It was hard to figure out what it was, as it moved oddly. Instead of shining our flashlight, we watched in curiosity, whispering guesses about what it might be. Suddenly, the dim light exploded into several bright lights accompanied by loud engine noises. Startled by the sudden brightness and noise, we turned and ran as fast as we could, hearing shouts and engines closing in on us. By pure chance, we dove into a thick, dark bush beside a hill, a natural hiding spot, and watched from there. There were 4 men, 2 on ATVs and 2 on motorcycles, shouting at each other. We couldn't hear them clearly because of the distance, but we whispered to each other, trying to guess who they might be. Our first thought was park rangers, but that didn't seem likely given the nature of the area and the vehicles they used. They started calling out, threateningly saying things like, "We know you're out there. Come on out." We stayed quiet, hoping they were just bluffing. Then one of the men shouted, "Find them now!" and smashed a bottle. That sound shattered any hope that they were just rangers. They split up and rode off in different directions along the paths, including the one we had come from. We stayed still for a long time, too scared to move from our hiding spot. We watched the lights of their vehicles crisscrossing the paths, one of them even circling back to his starting point. I considered calling for help, but was too afraid the light from my phone would reveal us. After what seemed like hours, when the lights were farthest away, we gathered our courage to get up and find a safer place to call for help. We pushed ourselves to run faster through the woods, our breaths heavy and hearts pounding with fear. As the beams from their vehicles lit up different parts of the paths, we would find new places to hide. But as we moved on, the trees thinned out and our hiding spots grew scarce. The terror I felt as they passed close by with only leaves for cover was intense. Eventually, we broke out of the woods and found ourselves at an intersection of 2 main roads, a good distance from where we had started. We ducked into a ditch to finally make a phone call for help. I pulled out my phone and noticed several missed calls from another friend, Mark, who had expected to meet us after our night out. I quickly called him back, my voice shaking as I explained where we were and that we urgently needed a ride. Fortunately, Mark was close by, not having given up on our plans despite our silence. He was already driving towards us. I told him precisely where to find us at the corner of the two roads. He promised to be there fast. Alex and I huddled down, hiding and waiting anxiously. Thankfully, Mark arrived before those terrifying men found us. We jumped into the back seat of his car, shouting for him to drive away fast. He sped off, taking us away from the nightmare. The relief of being safe in the car, driving home, was overwhelming. I told Mark everything that had happened, but we decided not to call the police. We figured those men would be gone by the time anyone arrived, and we didn't want to get in trouble for being on those paths so late. To this day, I don't know who those men were. My family and friends have all kinds of guesses, but nothing certain. Alex and I later confessed to each other that during the chaos, we both thought of a chainsaw because of the loud revving sounds. It could have been much worse, we realized. The most frustrating part is that we still don't know why those men chased us so desperately that night. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. About 3 years ago, I was studying at a university in a large city in the U.S., living with 2 roommates in a small apartment. One of my roommates, whom we'll call Anna, was known for often inviting various people from the city over to our place. During one fall semester, Anna made friends with a guy from her advertising class named Max. Max turned out to be her marijuana supplier, and she started bringing him around quite often. I had a hunch they might be more than just friends, although Anna always denied it. Their relationship seemed odd to me, but it wasn't really my place to question it. My other roommate, Lucy, and I found Max quite charming in his own way, though we couldn't quite see what Anna saw in him. One evening, we invited Max over for dinner. As we ate, Max boasted about playing for our university's football team and bragged about the business he started at 25. He was apparently quite successful as a marijuana dealer, a job that earned him a lot of money. He told us he was named Max because he had once lived in Dallas, Texas. His parents seemed to like the city enough to name him after it. Lucy and I just nodded along, not really impressed. We thought he seemed too full of himself. Despite his claims, Max wasn't a big guy, barely 5'4" and around 150 pounds. Max joined us for dinner a couple more times after that night. Lucy once told me about a time she went to buy marijuana from him at his off-campus apartment. There, she found Anna completely knocked out on a chair in some room, in the middle of the day. When Lucy arrived, Max acted as if it was normal and didn't even mention Anna being there. Lucy tried to wake Anna up, who just came to in a fog, and rudely told Lucy to leave her alone. When Lucy told me what had happened, we both agreed it was really strange and that Max didn't seem like a safe person to be around. A few months later, Anna stopped spending time with Max. She mentioned he had become angry because she refused to sleep with him. Later, I learned that one of her friends had been engaged to him for a while. And surprise, surprise, his real name wasn't actually Max. 2 years have passed since then, and neither Lucy nor I have kept in touch with Anna. Now, Lucy and I were living in different parts of the city, doing our own things. One day, our phones buzzed with a news alert. A girl who had recently joined our college had vanished after leaving a campus bar the night before. It wasn't long, just a few days, until a shocking news story broke. This girl had been murdered by someone she left the bar with that night. Then, I received a phone call from Lucy. The conversation went something like this. "Hey, do you remember what Max's real name was?" "I think it was Michael or something like that." She quickly said, "Check out this news article online. Michael killed that girl who just disappeared." I went online and saw it. A chilling mugshot of Max, now known as Michael, next to a photo of the girl he had murdered. The story got even more disturbing. He had apparently taken her home that night, likely thinking it was just a one-night stand. At some point, things turned horrific, and he killed her using blunt force and strangling her. And it gets worse. He cleaned up all the evidence in his apartment, stuffed her body into a storage container, and then took a taxi to his grandmother's house far away. There, he buried the container with her remains on the property. After the police obtained a video of them leaving the bar together, it didn't take long for them to track him down. In the weeks that followed, many other women came forward with eerie stories about Michael. The guy who claimed to play college football and run a successful business was lying about it all. Moreover, he was about 28 years old, pretending to still be a student at our college. In truth, he was just lurking around, preying on younger women. The whole thing was horrifying, especially what happened to that poor young girl. Last summer, I decided to go camping with my friend Anna and our small dog in a well-known part of a nearby national forest. We chose a spot next to a creek. It wasn't a regular campground, but it was a known site. There was a place to park the car, a circle of stones for a campfire, and a flat area near the water. In the middle of the night, a large truck pulled up next to our car. The engine just kept running. After a while, 3 men got out. They walked into our campsite. They were speaking in low voices, and the noise from the creek made it hard to hear them. I had a bad feeling about this. All the while, our dog was growling quietly. I whispered to Anna to stay silent, hold the dog, and hide. I crawled out of my sleeping bag and put on my shoes. The only thing I had to protect us was a forest axe, which is bigger than a hatchet but smaller than a regular axe. It's really useful for dealing with things in the woods. It has a leather cover with a metal snap to keep the blade safe. The men took their time walking around our camp, maybe trying to scare us. I snapped the metal button off loudly, pulling the cover off the axe, ready to defend ourselves if needed. The sound made all 3 stop. They might have thought it was a gun being readied because they hurried back to their truck and drove away without saying anything. So to those scary men who came to our campsite in the dead of night for who knows what reason, I'm very glad we never really met, and I hope we never do.